Good morning, everybody. I first want to say thanks to Quad A. We went through a kind of a lull there for a while when we had a lot of rules on who could come to Quad A and who couldn't come to Quad A, and it was mostly who couldn't come to Quad A. But I'll tell you, in the last couple of years, we've seen, or I've personally seen, a lot more attendance from folks inside the building, Frank Muth and some of the folks from G8 and G3 being here. And then we've had a lot of functional support. So for me personally, as I've gone through the last couple of days and engaged with a lot of my industry partners, and I've had a lot of support from the headquarters and a lot of support from our functionals, and it's been really, really valuable for me, and I've gotten a lot out of the last couple of days. And I spent a lot of time on Sunday with my boss, Ms. Shu, and some on Monday with her, and she was equally impressed with what she thought was an increased amount of engagement across our community, and she was very, very impressed with how she's seen Quad A grow from last year to this year. So thanks to Quad A for putting on a first-class summit once again. We're getting a lot out of it. I am personally, and I always look forward to coming here. I said, you know, of all the things I do every year, this is probably the one place for me to go to try to get level set across all the formations that we work in and around in the PEO, from some of the cab commanders to soldiers, to industry partners, to government stakeholders, to everyone that's here across the aviation enterprise. This is probably the most valuable couple of days I spend to kind of level set and synchronize across all of the enterprise. So I really appreciate this opportunity and being here. So my first couple of charts, I was going to talk about budget. So I don't think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to maybe hit a couple of things on each chart, and then I was going to talk about programs, and then Ms. Shu and General Lundy covered pretty much down on the materiel portion of my briefing. So what are your questions? No, I'm just thinking. I'll hit a couple of things on each chart, and then I would invite you to come. I think it's 1 o'clock this afternoon. I think that time's correct. We'll be on the floor. Engaging in the Q&A period for an hour, so I always look forward to that, hearing what your questions are. So hopefully, I'll get the chance to see you there. So go ahead and go to the next chart, please. So I think most of you are familiar with the PEO and what we do. It's engage with all the stakeholders that I talked about earlier in the government, in our formations, in industry, in order to execute those dollars. As many have said, and I'll talk about in the next couple of slides, the aviation portfolio is the single largest portfolio in the Army. And so that's a lot of responsibility from everyone in this room, from soldiers flying and fighting those systems, to industry delivering capabilities, to all across those government stakeholders you'll see up in the upper right-hand corner of that slide. It takes the whole team and the whole enterprise moving forward to keep us successful and continuing to earn the trust of the Army staff, OSD, and our Congress. It's your performance over time that has earned the trust of the people who appropriate dollars that allow us to execute our mission. So it's your ability to do that that has earned that. And so I challenge you to keep doing that. So a lot of money in base dollars. We also execute a lot of money in OCO today. And we also execute a lot of reimbursable dollars across the FMS portfolio. And that's a big piece of where we're moving in the coming years. It's going to help us bridge some of the areas where we might have a gap, a lull in a production line. So we have a lot of dependencies upon our FMS customers, and we're starting to engage a lot more across the entire enterprise. Next chart. So most of the faces are the same here. I'll just point out a couple of changes since I stood up here last year. Let's see, Steve Clark is a fixed wing PM now, and Courtney Cody is the PM for UAS. They both took over last summer of 14. And this summer we'll be saying farewell to Jerry Davis, who will leave Aviation Systems, and Matt Hanna will come take his job, and Thomas Todd is departing Utility Helicopter, and Billy Jackson is coming to take his place. Next chart. So here's my first budget chart, and I'll just say that really strong R squared that Mr. Meyer talked about. You can see that kind of coming down from left to right. You know, the key things here, just a couple of points. Number one, FY15, that's the enacted budget that we're executing today. And as I go and talk to industry, What I really need help doing is getting on contract. It's executing. It's getting dollars obligated. And we had a conversation yesterday about money being committed but not yet obligated. So my point to everyone was, procurement dollars are 3-year dollars, and RDT&E dollars are 2-year dollars. But we need to treat everything like it's 1-year money today. Because when it comes time for mid-year move-arounds, which happen here in the next 30 days, people in the building are not going to consider, well, it's 3-year money. If it's not obligated, we stand a high chance of losing those dollars. And if it's not dispersed, if it's RDT&E money, we stand a high chance of losing those dollars. So I know there's two sides of the table, right? There's the industry side and the government side, but we got to get to the finish line, right? That's how we get measured on, and that's what our soldiers need us to do, right? So we got to get to the finish line. And so that's my challenge to you. And if we're ever having a conversation and you need something from the government that you don't think you're getting, creative thinking, flexible thinking, transparency, let me know about that. Because we have got to get to the finish line. That's how we secure those dollars, that's how we earn trust, and ultimately that's how we deliver capability, right? So think of money as 1-year dollars, and let's get to the finish line. And then the next thing on that chart is, that last bar is the President's budget request. So, and I'll just reemphasize what Ms. Shue said yesterday, what Mr. Meyer said, and what Frank also said, and that's that President's budget request does not represent the BCA level of funding. And if you remember what Ms. Shue said, kind of as she walked off the stage, she said she had heard that the House was going to enact BCA levels of funding. So that's not that bar. That's less than that bar. And that creates risk, as Frank said, in 130 programs across the Army. So that's a big deal for us. And 130 programs is major, right? So that means a reshuffling of the priorities and how we're going to execute from 16 and beyond. Next chart. So so Frank talked about this also. If you look in 15, we're down to $20 billion in procurement and RDT&E. And if you go to 16, you see we're moving back up to 23. And our senior leaders, as they have testified in front of the SASC and the HASC over the last couple of weeks, they've all said the PB16 represents what the Army needs in order to execute its strategic missions. So a level of funding below that will not allow us to do that. Now, you have heard some things in some of the previous briefings that said, and some people in Congress have said, well, can we make up the difference between the BCA level of funding and what your requirement is in PB16 with OCO funding, right? And so everyone's been pretty consistent. All the speakers have been consistent, and if you go back and look at what the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff have said over the last couple of weeks, it's we'll take what money we can get and we'll fit that into how we need to move forward as an Army. But there's two major challenges with that, right? Two. Number one is the current limitations for OCO are in statute. So we need some statutory relief in order to move forward and spend those OCO dollars for things other than contingency operations. So think modernization. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is the ability to do long-term modernization requires stable funding, and that's not what OCO is. 1-year money, 1-year money. So, as the Chief and the Secretary have said, we will take OCO funding and we'll figure out how to make that work in the context of what we can use it for. But in order for us to execute what we need to do across the President's budget to accomplish our strategic goals as an Army, we need our PP16 level of funding. And the other thing that Frank talked about was historically our equipping peg has been somewhere between 24 to 27%. So, as he said, we're down to 17, 18%. Next chart. So this represents PB16. And so what I want to do now is, we might not have as much money as we would like. And if Budget Control Act levels of funding get allocated down to our aviation portfolio, we're clearly not going to have the funding levels that we anticipate having moving forward into to FY16. But if you look at what we're presenting in the President's budget, it's huge. It's 25% of the entire Army's equipping budget is in this portfolio. And again, that's a testament to the formations out there that are flying and fighting every day. It's a testament to industry's ability to deliver, and it's a testament to this enterprise staying synchronized and moving out. And I challenge you to keep doing that, because as I've been in this job and gone back and looked, if you look this year, it's 25%. If you looked last year, it was 24%. If you looked the year before that, it was 23%. So our percentage of the equipping PEG has actually grown over the last 3 years. So again, a high degree of trust and confidence that you have given our senior leaders, that you can execute your plan. So I challenge you to keep doing that. So we're doing a lot of things. We're buying a lot of hardware. If you look in the development programs there, you heard General Lundy talk about ITEP. We are joined at the hip with General Richardson and AMCOM on our UH-60 Victor program. I think that's an indication of how we're going to move forward in modernizing our portfolio. That's an example of the combinations of the sustainment PEG and OMA funding and the equipping PEG and procurement funding to deliver a capability that independently we would not have been able to do. So General Richardson and his team are doing recap of our L models while we're using equipping PEG funding to develop a digital cockpit. We're going to put those two things together, and we're going to digitize the last 760 Blackhawks that we would not have been able to do had we had to pay for all of it with equipping PEG dollars. So that means 2,135 Blackhawks will all be digital airplanes because of the cooperation of the sustaining and the equipping PEGs. So that's really big for us. Next chart. Okay, I think this is my last budget chart, I promise. So FY15, this is what we're executing today. This is what I really need people to get to the finish line on, right? So we're doing mid-year move-arounds in 30 days. So we really got to get to work. So if you look at, we talk about 25%, 23, then 24, then 25% over from 14, 15, and 16. If you add the OCO piece in there and look up there, we have another $1 billion in supplementals in OCO. You add that in the context of what all of the Army's getting in OCO funding, and we go from 25% or 24% in 15 to 30% of the Army's budget when it comes to combining OCO funding and equipping PEG dollars. So, once again, a huge responsibility and a huge testament to what this enterprise has been able to accomplish, and a huge challenge for us moving forward. Next chart. So I want to talk a little bit about a couple of the programs that we're executing. Aviation platforms, General Lundy always talks about the asymmetric advantage that we bring to our Army. And that advantage is soldiers and formations and delivering combat capability all around the globe. You remember that chart he put up there that had those stars, those red and blue stars, and I get a little bit worried. You go back to that first chart I put up there, and you saw that OCO was like this at the beginning of the chart, and it's like this at the end of the chart. So all those stars make me think the requirements for our combat formations are not going down, while that OCO amount is going down. So I worry about our ability to continue to deploy around the globe and modernize our formations in a way that brings it all together as we execute ARI. And so as we execute in the materiel portion of ARI, it's done inside these PMs. And if you look across this, I think it's 8 or 9 ACAT-1 programs. And so that just means those are the big programs. And those are usually based on funding, the amount of money it takes to execute these programs. And so the higher the amount of money, the more help you get from the Pentagon, right? So that was kind of a joke. The more opportunity you get to go to the Pentagon to explain your decision making, right? So we have the most number of ACAT-1 programs, big programs of any PEO in the Army, and we have a whole slew of smaller ACAT-2 and ACAT-3 programs, and then we have special interest programs also. So those are programs that don't meet the dollar threshold, but they're important enough to the Army and to OSD that they want to give us a little special help. So we have some of those as well. And so we get a lot of oversight, and a lot of times we do get help from the building, and I'll tell you, we get a great deal of help from guys like Frank Muth and Wally Rugen and John Lindsay and our ASALT team led by Brian Craddock. Those guys are real heroes every day up in the building fighting that out for us, and it keeps me home at least a little bit, so I only have to go up to the Pentagon like once every other week. I'm just going to hit a couple of programs. So if you look at cargo helicopters, for example, they have an ACAT-1 program. It's a CH-47F program. While they're continuing to sustain D models in partnership with AMCOM. So you also hear how we're moving forward in Chinook Block 2. So that's acknowledgement that while we're still fielding our CH-47Fs, and we're in a multi-year contract doing that now, we acknowledge that in order to posture that airframe as we move forward out to 2060, and you look at future vertical lift and the focus on an attack and a utility variant in the near term, and the size of those two fleets, we're not going to get to a heavy variant until later in the FVL cycle. So we have to do something today to meet the requirements, again, that General Lundy talked about for power and speed and range and other ways to integrate survivability in the cockpit in terms of ASE and degraded visual environment. So all those types of things we have to start working on today so we get ahead of the power curve when it comes to delivering that capability out to 2060. So that's the Chinook Block 2 program, and Colonel Rob Berry and his team have done a great job of putting that together, working with Ramsey Bentley in the TICM's office. They've done a super job, and they're out moving forward on an analysis of alternatives now, with a due back to OSD on a decision on how to move forward in about 6 months. Again, that's an ACAT-1 program, so they get help from the building a lot. I'm going to talk about utility helicopter a little bit. Probably one of the largest PMs that we have in terms of breadth. Not only are they delivering UH-60Ms and fielding those today, working again with AMCOM, sustaining A's and L's at the same time while they're working on a medevac variant. Well, they also have the common engines PM there, so they manage the T700 engine as well as the ITEP engine. General Lundy talked about that, Ms. Shue talked about that. All you have to do is read any AUSA magazine, any Quad A magazine, read any testimony on any modernization hearing from a senior leader in the Army, and you'll hear him talk about ITEP. And I'll tell you, that program, when I took this job 15 months ago, that program was almost not going to happen. And there was a lot of hard thinking, a lot of prioritization from our branch chief, and a lot of tough decisions and trades to be made inside the portfolio to make sure that program stayed resourced to a level that the Army headquarters and Army staff and OSD would allow us to move forward. So we're moving forward with that right now. I feel really good about where we are on ITEP, and again, challenge all of the supply base out there to keep moving forward on ITEP. So a lot going on just in that one PM, including Lakota. So inside of one PM, he's got UH-60M, which is an ACAT-1 program, Lakota, and ITEP. Those are 3 ACAT-1 programs, and UH-60V. So a lot going on inside there. And one last PM I'll hit on is the PM for fixed wing. Steve Clark took that job last summer. And frankly, I'd say probably that was my largest surprise coming into this job. I'd spent a lot of time in those organizations across the top, less time in fixed wing and the non-standard rotary wing PM. But the amount of scrutiny that goes in to our fixed wing fleet for where it fits in terms of total funding inside the portfolio is really, really surprised me. And so we spent a lot of time dealing with all of our stakeholders across the fixed wing portfolio, and Colonel Clark and the team have really kind of got us level set on a couple of major things. Delivering an EMARS program that meets the CPD. So our original plan was to build 24 new airplanes, and we've had to take a step back from there and say, what makes the most sense in this fiscally constrained environment? And the answer was, keep building the 4 that we were going to build for EMD, and then take advantage of the OCO-funded other 20 airplanes and build those up to be CPD compliant in order to use those funds that we would have spent on those building 20 new builds, using those elsewhere, again, trading back to priorities. So that program's moving along. ARLE is moving along. We've had a lot of positive momentum there. We looked at, as we did with EMARS, changing our strategy to best suit what makes sense from integrating our portion of the mission and the PEO for IWS portion. So I feel comfortable we're moving along there. And the last thing I'll say is FUA, the future utility aircraft. The CPD's in staffing now, and how we move forward with that will be dependent upon the requirements and as always, fiscal constraints and how we trade within the requirement. Next chart. So Ms. Hsu talked about this kind of broadly, but I'll just hit on a couple of the programs that I see nested in these areas. So the divestment piece is critical for us. If we don't divest these platforms, we will not be able to afford to modernize our entire portfolio. So we have got to move out there. Again, in cooperation with AMCOM, we work with reset and sustainment across all of our fleets and in everything we do. We continue to modernize. Ms. Hsu talked about our incremental evolutionary approach to ECPing, to making changes to the production line, and then going back and doing MWOs in the field to bring capabilities to some of our platforms. You know, most of our platforms have been around a long time. 1978 for Blackhawks, 84 for Apache, 62 for Chinooks. So we continually make those incrementally better while we look to new systems. And we spent a lot of time and a lot of energy prioritizing what those new systems are to make sure we're resourcing where we need to go in the future to meet those capability gaps that General Lundy talked about. So you'll see ITEP, you'll see Chinook Block 2, CU-860V, PUA, and then the last thing, you know, and Ms. Hsu calls it the seed corn, and it's our S&T programs. And so we have been, I think, more nested in the with the S&T community than we've been in a long time. General Lundy hosted an S&T forum down at Fort Rucker a couple of months ago. I walked in that room and there were probably 75 people in that room from all across the Army, not just AMRDEC, but ARL, the CERDEC, organizations in Aberdeen Proving Ground, NASA, from all over our enterprise to make sure we stay aligned. Again, if we don't, we have limited amounts of RDT&E and S&T funding, so we really have to take advantage of the opportunities that we have. Next chart. So quick synopsis on where we are with JMR and FVL. So the AMRDEC, through Dr. Bill Lewis, his office is executing our joint multi-role technical demonstrator. We down selected to 2, the Sikorsky Boeing team and Bell, to build flight demonstrators starting in FY17. We're also going on contract with Karaman AVX to continue some of the development of some of their technologies, which I think are going to help us move forward in potentially what we would move forward with in FVL. So interestingly, they're also working with other sources of S&T and R&D funding with DARPA and also with the Navy to help mature their technology so that we could potentially integrate those when it comes time for FVL. We're working with the Navy on the mission systems architecture demo. So that's the cockpit piece. You know, General Lundy talked about cockpit commonality being one of those things. I think someone asked a question about S&T, and he said, that's the kind of thing I'd like to get after because it doesn't just make the airplane better, it makes the whole enterprise a lot easier to manage when it comes to training, when it comes to a lot of other things. So we're absolutely gonna do that from the start when it comes to FVL. Going backwards for us, our first foray into doing something like that is with the U-860V cockpit. So we're looking forward to what that might bring to us in the rest of the fleet. And so the last thing is as we move from the Joint Multi-Role Tech Demonstrator into FVL, we're looking at doing a material development decision. So that's going to OSD and saying, we think we're ready to proceed and formalize this program. We're talking about doing that in FY17, which is like next year. You know, that's the end of next year. So that is right around the corner. And we're talking about doing a milestone A in 2019. And you do an analysis of alternatives, do a bunch of analysis, and then award some contracts starting in 2021 when our large amount of funding starts, just at the end of the current POM. So you know, one of the things I'll also say is, you know, when Frank was up here talking, he said people will come to him and say, I'd like to get this in the POM, right? And then he was talking about, well, the timing, you know, in December is when you get inside the POM, so you're too late for this year. So one of the other things to think about is So we're in the year of execution today in FY15. The president's budget is done for FY16. So we're working on the POM. So right now, we just completed the POM 2-star reviews for FY17 to 21, right? So our die is cast for 17 to 21. So if you have a great idea and you're not tracking with the timeline that Frank laid out there, like he said, you can get to us in the next POM, but understand what that means is FY22, right? Because we're doing the 17-21 POM now. So it really is important to understand how the process works if you want to get integrated into the long-term base planning for how we're moving forward. Next chart. So I'm not going to brief this chart, but because I don't think I could. But I put this up here. I put this up here for a reason. And so last year when I stood up here, I'd been in this job about 2 months. And what I said was, when I see this chart, it reminds me of when I took this job. It was almost 10 years to the date from when I was in Comanche as a major, and we canceled Comanche. And I told you all that was my birthday. That was on my birthday. So I remember that date. And what I said was, we were at in my perception was we were at an inflection point in this branch and how we serve our Army. With the decisions that we're making at the time for how we were going to move forward with ARI reminded me of the decision on Comanche and how we were making big decisions on how we were going to move forward. And you remember these lines of effort back then, it said recon, attack. I don't think we had a UAS line back then. We had a utility line. We had a cargo line. We had a JCA. The line was called JCA, if you remember that, Joint Cargo Aircraft. And then we had an enablers line, and it had things like the Joint Attack Munitions, the JAMS folks, the Air Soldier, Air Warrior, and survivability equipment. And the idea was that we were fencing the dollars that would have been in Comanche to help support the branch and move forward in those areas. And so I felt like we were in that same position as we were discussing how we were going to move forward with ARI. And now that I'm a year later, I realize that what we're doing today is Comanche cancellation times 10. It is 10 times more complicated. It's 10 times more comprehensive. It is across all of our .mil PF domains to how we architect flight school. It is doctrine. It's the sum of some of the great technical advancements we have made in the last decade. I remember being a major and going to talk to folks in UAS in Comanche and going down to the TISM Comanche office and talking about, do you think it's really possible to control a UAS from the cockpit of a Comanche? Could we do that? And here we are a decade later, we're saying we are not going to buy a manned scout platform because we have matured that technology and that capability and that doctrine, and our soldiers have executed that in theater, in combat, and they've been creative and flexible, and they've shown us that they can do that. So we've come so far in those 10 years, but we've got a lot farther to go if we're going to execute that. If we're going to do that, we got a lot farther to go. And I'll tell you, I've been really, really impressed and honored and humbled to work with some of the formations out there, from industry to some of our cabs to all the different stakeholders you saw on that first chart. We've made so much great progress, but there's a lot of uncertainty ahead of us. If you remember, I said we fenced those dollars in Comanche, and many of the folks on the front row were a part of making sure that we were successful. And when you look today, when you take a snapshot today and go back and say, what have we done in the last decade as a result of those decisions? I don't think you could say anything, but those were the right decisions, and they were executed correctly. And so my big hope is that whoever the PEO is 10 years from now, he'll stand up and say, those folks who executed that did that correctly across all of the many complex things that we're doing, and they resulted in an aviation branch that is serving our Army like it has for the last 10 years. So that's my challenge to you. I know it's tough times. Mr. Bayer talked about the different scenarios that we find ourselves in now as they relate to the budget. I know there's different scenarios that we find ourselves in now as it relates to how we treat dollars, how we get on contract, the requirements that we have for cost and pricing data. Believe me, I got it. I mean, I understand. But if you need help from me on getting to the finish line, please reach out to me, because that's what in order to do that, there's about 1 million finish lines in there that we got to get to. And I ask for your help in getting there. Next chart. Okay, so that's my last chart. I appreciate your attention. I appreciate this forum. I want to thank Quad A for, again, doing a first-class job. Fantastic. I'll be around all the rest of today, and I'll be on the stage out on the floor around 1 o'clock, so I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.